Om Vakratunda Mahakaya Surya Koti Samaprabha Nirvignam Kurume Deva Sarvakarishu Sarvada Shri Ganeshaya Namaha Om Namo Bhagavate Shri Swaminarayan Namaha Shri Hari Krishna Maharajaya Namaha Shri Ghansham Maharajaya Namaha Shri Sadgurubhyo Namaha Om Gunatita Vaksharam Brahma Bhagavan Purushottamah Jano Janandidam Satyam Muchyate Bhava Bandhanat Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Welcome to SwaminarayanSpirituality.com. This is Sachin. We are continuing our exploration of Vachanamrut, Garada Pratham number 1. Before we continue from last time, I would like to offer my prostrations to all the great sages in the past, present, and in the future, and to the Supreme Lord who exists in the heart of all beings. So to continue further from where we were last time, Maharaj was asked a question by a householder devotee. And that householder devotee's name is Shet Govardhan Bhai. That is a name. So he was a householder, he was a businessman, and he was a great devotee of Maharaj during his time. So in that same time when this question of Akhanda Vritti is being discussed, the question of Maya comes up. And this is a very relevant question, because, as we said last time, the answer that Maharaj is giving is about dhyan. That when one is meditating on God, when one is trying to connect with Bhagavan through vritti, through the mental connection. Of course, physical is there, verbal is there, but it's ultimately mental. It is the mental connection that he's referring to. And his answer is that whatever comes in between and blocks that vritti, that creates a blockage, that creates an obstruction, that is Maya. So we talked about that last time. I'll just do a quick review of that. He said, Maharaj answered the question about Maya, where he says, Bhagwan no bhakta hoy, tene Bhagwan ni murti nu dhyan karta, je padarth adu avine avran kare, tene Maya kahiye. What does it mean? First of all, he's talking about the devotees. Bhakta. You will see throughout Vachanamrut that the teaching is towards the devotees, bhaktas. It's for everybody in general, but it is for devotees specifically. The devotees of God. God meaning that supreme one without a second, Bhagavan Paramatma. That bhakta of Paramatma, when that devotee is trying to connect with Bhagavan in dhyan. Dhyan is meditation. Now what kind of dhyan are we talking about? What does it mean? What type of dhyan is this? So, it actually can be any kind of dhyan. But he's talking about the dhyan of the murti. It's any kind of dhyan that is connected to the murti itself. Murti meaning form of God. Or either the human manifested form or the archa form. Or one could also say the form of God residing in the being of great saints. And actually then also God present in everything and everyone. So, he's talking about sadhana here. In this sadhana, there is dhyan. The dhyan of the murti is being specifically mentioned here. So, how is this to be done? So, if we have a specific murti of Bhagavan, some avatar, or we have Bhagavan Krishna, we have Sajanand Swami's murti for the devotees of Maharaj, or other devotees have other forms that they're worshipping at times. When the murti is there, it could be whichever murti. It could be Ganesha murti, Shivji ki murti, Radha Krishna murti, whichever one is Ishta Devata. Murti is in front of us, and there is dhyan being done of the murti. Right? So now what does that mean? So first of all, before you can even do dhyan, one has to have the conviction, as I mentioned in the morning satsang today, one has to have the conviction that this is Paramatma in front of me. That bhavna, that intellectual conviction is necessary for bhakti. Otherwise one cannot do bhakti. And dhyan is just another form of bhakti in this sense. It's an extension. So with the conviction that this form in front of me, even though it is made out of a fiberglass or wood or whatever it is made out of, or painting or the saptadhatu or metal, whatever the substance may be, there's a form there. So the bhakta, through puja, archana and shraddha, with a tremendous amount of Shraddha, believes that this is Paramatma. That is called Nishta, Swarup Nishta. Now, one could say that when Bhagwan is present, when enlightened being or God is present in human form, yes, that is the incarnation of God, or God himself or itself is present. You can directly do the dhyan, but that's in human form. But when that form is not present, then the murti is there, and also great saints are there. So, the dhyan of the murti means absorption in the murti. It is a linkage from inside the heart, inside the mind, the energies and the powers inside, the link with God. Now, in this linking, there are different types of dhyan that are talked about. There is something called sang dhyan. Sang dhyan, salil dhyan, saparshad dhyan, upanga dhyan. These are 4 different types of dhyan that are done of the murti. So sang means to see the whole murti, head to toe, and to really believe in the heart that this is God. That is called Nishta. That is a Swarup Nishta. With that belief, with that strongly developed belief, with that sense that this is Paramatma, with that bhavana of the bhakta, one starts the connection through bhajans and mantra. So bhajans of different kinds. Like in the case of Bhagwan Krishna, there are thousands of bhajans written after Sri Krishna Bhagwan was on this planet. In the case of Maharaj himself, there were thousands and thousands of bhajans written about him in his own time, and about Lord Krishna also, and some of the other incarnations. So, bhajan kirtan, even beautiful dhun. Dhun is a common word that is used in Gujarati. It's just a repetition of the mantra again and again and again. Ramakrishna Govinda Jai Jai Govinda, like this. These are all different parts of just repetitive words, but they're divine words. These are the words, the names of God. All of this sadhana is implied in this. Whether it is bhajan, kirtan, katha shravan, listening to the spiritual talks, listening to Leela Charitra, God-centered activity. That this is the whole point, that our mind is filled with this worldly content. There's no question. So let's be clear about what we mean by that. That our mind, as it is filled with all different kinds of programming inside the mind, which we have talked about before. But the question is about learning how to live in a very different way. That is the question. And this needs to be understood in terms of the transformation of the psychological consciousness in itself. And to do that, one does need to inquire into this state of mind, where this fundamental transformation from the root can occur, where the totality of psychological consciousness can transform. So when Maharaj is using the word dhyan, all of this is implied, that the totality of psychological consciousness is fundamentally transformed from the inside out. Now, when we use the word consciousness here, we are talking about psychological phenomena, which includes thoughts, feelings, actions, which are conscious and unconscious. It is the whole process of the mind. It is the activity of the mind that is talked about. It also includes concepts, ideas, opinions, beliefs, feelings. All of that is incorporated inside there. So let's look at that in terms of the murti of Bhagavan. The concept of God is first in the mind. When Maharaj is using the word Bhagavan in the very first part of this Vachanamrut, and we talked about it before, it begins with the concept, really. But then he talks about the word Swarup. Now it's no longer a concept. It is manifested in front of you. I mean, Sachin here can think about God in an abstract sense, as a concept. But when the concept is seen as a reality in front of us, in the form of a Sadguru, or Paramatma, Swayam Paramatma, And in the forms, the 8 different forms of the murti, which we've recorded before, we talked about that before. The 9th is the enlightened sage. All of those concepts of God are no longer concepts. They are in front of you, pratyaksha. Pratyaksha means seen in front of you with your eyes. That's what the word pratyaksha means. Pratyaksha means that which you see with your eyes. So even that with which you see with your eyes, it is the indriya, it is part of the material world. No question. Even if you see a great sage, or let's say Bhagwan, if you were seeing Bhagwan Krishna, Bhagwan Ram, Sajanand Swami, or other incarnations or other great beings, if you see them in this world, they look like us, they act like us, they are functioning like us in many ways, but they are not like us. They are totally different. They have assumed a form like us. So the concept that is God is no longer a concept, it is pratyaksha. So these 2 words come again and again and again in Vachanamrut. Pratyaksha Sri Krishna, pratyaksha Bhagwan, pragata Bhagwan, pragata Purushottam. This comes again and again and again throughout. Because he's referring to, and the Paramahansas have written this in many places at the end of many of the Vachanamrut, that the God that Maharaj is talking about, that is Vetirek, that is outside the Brahmands and all, that is manifested within him. So he is directing to the spiritual tattva, that is Bhagavan Purushottam, that is in that body of Sajanand Swami. That is how it was thought about at that time. And then it was also thought about that this body and the Paramatma Tattva are one. But we'll talk about that later on. The point is that is an indication of where we need to go. That we have a body also, we have a mind also, all of that is there. But we want to have the infusion, the awakening, the opening of that dimension of Paramatma, sitting inside the Atma as witness, and to be present fully in the body, in the mind, in the senses. And this state of Bhagwan being present in every pore of the being, in Gujarati it is called Akhanda Dharak Sant. I will mention this many, many, many times as we go ahead in this. Akhanda Dharak means what? Akhanda means unbroken holding of God. In one sense, Sajanand Swami Maharaj as a bhakta of Sri Krishna, in that role as a bhakta, he's holding Sri Krishna all the time inside of him. It can be interpreted that way also, objectively. Many of the devotees don't like to interpret it that way, or don't like to talk about it that way. That's up to them. I'm just going to present things objectively and have this recorded, because people listening to this are not only going to be devotees of Swaminarayan. We are interested in the spirituality. So the fact is, from a bhakta point of view, Sajanand Swami as a bhakta of Sri Krishna, you can see that throughout his life. No question about that. He was doing bhakti of Sri Krishna Bhagavan all the way through. Now, of course, is that all he is? We would have to go further into Vachanamrut Gnan and Maharaj's life and all that to understand that a bit further, that is he just a bhakta or is he more than a bhakta? Was he an incarnation? What's meant by an incarnation? What's meant by an avatar? And then there's even that final idea that the Sarva Avatar na Avatari, that the Avatari Swarup, the Avatari Tattva is Sajanand Swami, which is propagated in most of the branches of the Swaminarayan Sampradaya today. But those things are much further up and further further developments in Vedanta and other things, that is a whole subject regarding Swarup Nishta, about who is he, so from a Tattva point of view, who is he? So in most of Vachanamrut you will find that he is talking about Pragat Sri Krishna, Pratyaksha Sri Krishna. He uses the word Krishna all the time, but you have to really study Vachanamrut to see some of the more esoteric meanings, and I don't want to get into that diversion right now, because I want to stay on the topic of Dhyan. So in a general sense, the dhyan is of Bhagwan. It's a dualistic sense. It's dualistic worship. There is God in the form of a Paramatma. Now, in a general sense, we can say any form of Paramatma that is there in Sanatana Dharma. Ishtadevata, Bhagwan Ganesh Ji, Vishnu Ji, Shiv Ji, any of the forms of the goddess, Mahalakshmi, Mahakali, Mahasaraswati, anybody, in a general sense. Right? In Vachanamrut itself, you can utilize Vachanamrut in a general sense, and then it has its more inner meanings also. So here, the point Maharaj is trying to emphasize is the obstructions that come in the way when one is meditating on God. And what are those obstructions? The content of the mind that is conditioned, which includes opinions, beliefs, different ideas, different attachments, all of that content interferes in dhyan. Now see this point beautifully, and that is exactly what he said. If you see Maharaj's words, he's saying that content, meaning he's using the word padarth. But padarth means objects, but if you were to really probe into that further, we can interpret that further, extend that word to mean all the content of psychological consciousness. And that psychological consciousness, the content of psychological consciousness, is the result of time in terms of years and the evolution of that consciousness based on all of the programming from childhood. So that programming from childhood, that development inside the mind of the psychological consciousness, it needs to be there, but that itself becomes the biggest obstruction in meditation on God, meditating on the form of God, in connecting the mind with God, because the mind is itself internally connected with its own internal content. And we keep living in that content again and again and again and again and again. So I want to introduce here, when Maharaj is using the word dhyan, he has talked about in other places in Vachanamrut, janpanu, meaning awareness. And I want to use the more modern language, and that is choiceless awareness. Choiceless awareness is, in Gujarati we'll say akhand janpanu, like constant awareness. What is happening inside my mind? Where am I in my life? What is the level of my connection with Paramatma? As a bhakta, that's the reason why Shriji Maharaj again is using the word bhakta. I think we have to be really very attentive to his every single word. Bhagwan no bhakta. Hoy. Hoy means what is present. There's a bhakta who is devoted to God, wants to realize God, and wants to experience the divinity of God, wants to experience God, wants to be in touch with Paramatma through akhanda vritti, as we already talked about. So it is the devotee through devotion, the bhakta through bhakti, that is connecting with murti. And what is interfering here? All kinds of things are interfering that are in the content of consciousness, that are coming inside our mind. Now somebody will ask the question, wait a minute, that content of consciousness is part of our programming, it's part of our life. How are we supposed to throw that away? Maharaj is not saying to throw that away. That's not what he's saying. He's asking us to detect it as the multiple factors that are blocking our meditative concentration and focus on the murti. I hope that point is clear. He's not asking us to remove the psychological consciousness. Je padarth adu avin avaran kare. Padarth meaning so many things are there. Family members are there, our programming is there, conditioning is there, all different friends and family and whatever, you name it. So many people and movies are programmed inside, and it's a massive amount of content. So when we try to connect with Bhagavan, we will not be able to do dhyan just like that. How to do it then? What are the stages and steps? They're also described throughout Vachanamrut. In Garada Pratham 22, there is the whole discussion about smruti vina gayu tina gaya javu. It meaning that when you do bhajan kirtan, with smruti, with love, with mahima, with glory, do the bhajan kirtan. So the very first step is to establish, like in our homes, a temple, or you go to the temples, certainly, During the time of Maharaj also, there is, like in Garada, there is the Murti of Gopinath Ji Maharaj. It's a form of Sri Krishna, but actually he had measured himself. And then the Murti was made to his own height because of the oneness with Sri Krishna from a devotional point of view. So it is a Murti of Radha and Krishna in Gadada. And that is Gopinath Ji Maharaj, very, very powerful Murti. Maharaj had done the Pratishtha of that Murti. So Maharaj was always keeping devotion active. He was always worshipping Sri Krishna in some form or other. He was always listening to Srimad Bhagavatam, 10th skand, 5th skand. In Shikshapatra, he's given Agnya to read those. So the devotional activities going on all the way through. Scriptures are being read. All that kind of environment is there. And in doing so, when these Vachanamrut were written, these are contemplative discussions and talks between the Paramahansas, the Grahasthas and others with Maharaj. So there were thousands apparently of these Vachanamrut. Out of that 273 were ultimately selected. So Maharaj is talking about the massive content in the mind. And he's using the word padarth, but we can extrapolate that to mean the entire psychological content. That is the result of time, and it is something that has evolved inside the mind. So it is in fact consciousness that is transmitted from generation to generation to generation. So there's so much heavy conditioning, and to be aware of that, choicelessly aware, that is Janpanu, is what leads to unobstructed dhyan. Now, there's other ways of thinking about this, lots of ways. Unobstructed dhyan occurs when there is so much mahima. It is called asadharan mahima. Means glory, greatness, mahatmya. See, who is it that is in front of me? My God, the Supreme Being, with all the satsang going on, the scriptural contemplation, the seva of the gurus and asking questions and whatnot, a conviction occurs about who is in front of me. And from that conviction, bhajan, bhakti, the dhyan occurs, the dhyan solidifies. Dhyan solidifies very, very well. So all different kinds of intellectual activity, it gets synchronized and it gets absorbed inside the Murti of Paramatma. Intellectual, emotional activity gets absorbed inside the Paramatma. So the dhyan of the Murti is with the bhavana that this is Bhagavan. And that form, that is the Murti, is considered by the Bhakta to be real. And all the other forms are transitory. This is particularly true in this Bhakti Marg. In Vishishtadvait Vedanta, in Brahma Vishishtadvait Vedanta, in Shuddhadvait, and in Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's teachings, all the Bhakti Acharyas, including Sajanand Swami, he's also considered to be as a Bhakti Acharya. The form of Paramatma should not be considered as a form evolved out of Maya, even though it is made out of stone and in whatever the substance is. Because if we consider it to be just like any other form, that will lead to atheism. The theistic feeling will not be there. So there is a psychology behind it, obviously. But the acharyas, the bhakti acharyas particularly, have specifically stated that the form of Paramatma is real, and all the other forms in this world are transitory, they are fleeting, and in comparison to the form of Paramatma, they don't really have any real existence. I mean, they do have existence temporarily. But the Sanatana tattva, that which is eternally existing, is Bhagwan. So Bhagwan has form, and the form that you're worshipping here, that is Bhagwan Swarup that we are talking about, that should be considered as eternally existing and existing at the end of all the pralayas. When everything else is blown away, in Gnan Pralay, in authentic Pralay, the only thing that remains is God. And because God is always still there, but all the influence of Maya goes away. So when all the influence of Maya is gone, that is called Pralay. Atyantika Pralay, final Pralay. And there is a form that remains called Kishore Murti. That Kishore form, about 14 years of age or so. It can take any form, obviously. But it is a form beyond Maya. It is not simply divine light. Divine light is also an aspect of God. That is Satchidananda. That light is coming from the body of God. You see, but the form, meaning the Bhagwan ka akar hai, it's a sakar form. So that form that is there inside Akshara Brahma, beyond Akshara Brahma, which in Swaminarayan language, then terminology, that is called, Akshar Dhamna Dhami. Akshar Dham means what? What is Akshar Dham? Akshar Dham is the imperishable abode of God. See the Bhagavad Gita in chapter 15. Chapter 15 is called Purushottama Yoga. Chapter 8 is called Akshara Brahma Yoga. When you put the two together, what do you have? Akshara Purushottam. Akshara means the imperishable abode. Tad Dhama Paramam Mama. And Bhagwan in the Gita says, I am beyond Shar and Akshar. Tasmat Ksharam Matitoham Aksharadapi Chottama Atosmi Loke Vedecha Pratitaha Purushottama. You'll see the three things in chapter 15 in the Gita. Shar, Akshar, and Purushottam. Shar means everything that which is temporary, changing. Akshara is that which is imperishable. Akshara Brahman. Akshara Brahma. Sometimes we say Akshara, sometimes we say Brahman, sometimes we say Akshara Brahman. And beyond that, in Vachanamrut, you'll see this again and again later on, Bhagavan is Aksharatit. The only way to describe what is God is to use this expression Aksharatit. Aksharatit means beyond Akshar. And when we say beyond Akshar, it is a different tattva. It is a separate tattva than Akshara Brahma. So this is very interesting. That it is a separate tattva. That is what Maharaj is talking about here. That tattva. From a tattva point of view, it is described as a Kishore Murti, not male or female, Satchidananda Vigraha. The form is Satchidananda because all the forms beyond Maya are Satchit Ananda. The Atma is also Satchidananda. The substance is the same, but the forms vary, the intensity of light varies. There is a certain light, intensity of light of the Atma. From where we are in Prakriti, we cannot imagine that even. Just of who we are. How are we going to even imagine what is God? If we cannot even, our mind cannot even imagine what is the Atma. I mean, it can imagine it, but it's not going to realize that way. The actual realization of the Atma is beyond any imagination. It is so tremendous that the Atma Tattva, once that is realized, so many acharyas have stopped right there. That's it. There can't be anything more than this. That is the vast infinite consciousness, the Brahman. That's the Upanishad, the Mahavakyas. We've talked about that a lot already in the morning satsang. And Maharaj has not discounted any of that. He has incorporated all of that. Shriji Maharaj's entire approach is highly synthetical, not exclusivist approach. But he is still giving his own tattvic realization. And he's giving very clear agnya and guidance to the devotees on who to worship. And the worship, meaning upasana, is of that Aksharatit Paramatma and nobody else. Only of God. Now we can consider any form of God here. If you want to say Shiva is the ultimate, fine. You can say Shiva. You can say Devi is the ultimate. You can say Krishna. You can believe anything you want is the ultimate. Sarvadeva namaskaram keshavam pratigacchati. I mean, ultimately it reaches the same point. I won't go into those bhed right now. What is Shiva and Parashiva and Mahavishnu? And we talked a little bit about that before. That's another very esoteric and intricate subject. But ultimately, the Vedas, the Vedanta, all scriptures, all gurus, all teachers, when they are worshipping, the worship all is only of that same ultimate one Paramatma. It's not of any two beings. It's only one. And in that sense, that is what is meant by Swaminarayan. Swaminarayan is a mantra, but it also means that Narayan, Bhagwan Narayan, that is the Aksharatit Paramatma. That is the Mool Swarup of Narayan. That Tattva is the Swamin of everything, everyone. That's what the word Swami means. Swami doesn't mean people with these turbans and all that thing. The word Swami means one who is directly in charge, one who is having the fullness of power to control everything. Who possesses everything, who can change everything, who can do everything, who controls everything, who sees everything. But particularly the word Swami means that that person is the owner of, the controller of. And what is he the controller of? Everything that is there in reality. Bhagwan Narayan. And we're talking now about that Aksharatit Paramatma, Bhagwan Narayan, beyond Akshara Brahma. There are forms of Narayan in Vaikuntha, that is Lakshmi Narayan, Nar Narayan, in Badrikashram, in Golok, that is Sri Krishna Narayan. There's many forms of Narayan in other places. Those are also discussed throughout Vachanamrut. Those are also forms of that same Narayan in different abodes. The Narayan Tattva is only one. It's not really two different things. But they are in different location. And they are underneath Mahamaya. So Mool Purush, Mool Prakriti, underneath Mool Purush and Mool Prakriti exist all of these other abodes. Sometimes that Mool Purush and Mool Prakriti, that combination, sometimes that is called Golok. There are some branches of Swaminarayan Sampradaya that believe that is Golok. Some believe that Golok is Pradhan Purush. Some people believe that Golok is actually same thing as Akshardham. So there's a lot of differences of perspective based on the scriptural interpretation about Golok and Akshardham, another very high level, super high level subject. And to understand that, we have to go through the Vaishnava literature, which we will do at some point, to some extent. The point here about the Swarup of Paramatma he's talking about, we can think of it in a general sense. We can think of it as Ishtadevata. We can also think about it from a Tattvik point of view, as I mentioned just right now. So, from a Tattva point of view, once that Nishta comes, that belief comes that who is in front of me is the Supreme Lord Himself. We can say Himself or herself. There's no him or her really. But in terms of like Sahajanand Swami as a Sadguru, we can say the Supreme Lord is manifested in that body that is a Sadguru. And that could be, in Bhagwan, it can be manifested, in many different ways at any time, really. Because God is only one. So, the fact is that a fundamental, radical transformation is talked about in Akhanda Vritti. And when Akhanda Vritti is there, it is beyond time, and one transgresses Maya. So when Maharaj is talking about the fact that there are all these obstructions, to recognize the obstruction and to choicelessly be aware of it, so that obstruction settles down naturally. It is perceiving the obstruction, perceiving the block. Oh, this thing is blocked. That blockage is not me. In Vedras, in the very beginning, Maharaj talked about this. Those range of thoughts and emotions and different sankalpas that are obstructing, that they are not me. I am their witnessing consciousness. I am the witness of that phenomena. Maharaj said, who eno drashta chu. Drashta means the watcher. That is the Atma. I am the watcher of those thoughts. So we de-identify with them. So when Maharaj is saying that when you recognize what is Maya, Maya is recognized when one sees that all of these objects and content of consciousness and conditioning and all that thing is an obstruction. One sees it in the through the light of choiceless awareness, and in seeing so, one de-identifies with it and then reconnects with Bhagavan. So it is de-identifying with the padarth that he's talking about, the various mental objects, etc., and physical objects, everything. It's a de-identification with them and identification with, through bhakti, with the form of Paramatma. So he's describing what is Maya. He's not really showing here how you get out of Maya. He's already talked about that in the previous paragraph. Continuously connect with Bhagavan, and that's how you get out. So that actually the way to get out is implied in this. That when you're doing dhyan is the way out. Dhyan is this unbroken connection. Or dhyan leads to unbroken connection. But when dhyan is present, when dhyan has to be established, it gets established in time. It doesn't happen right away. It will take years maybe. It might take months. It might take many lifetimes. It depends how much intensity we put behind this, and the intensity of contemplation and getting absorbed in satsanga. In Swaminarayan Sampradaya, there are so many who are tyagi sadhus and other devotees who are trying to accomplish all of this. But it's not an easy thing. You can get flabbergasted at any point in this. Maya is that which is going to pull you away from this contemplation on Bhagavan. And Maharaj is talking about when you're sitting for dhyan, murti nu dhyan karta je padarth. Karta means you are performing dhyan. And in that activity of performing dhyan, there is this obstruction that shows up. Recognize that obstruction. To recognize this obstruction is the beginning of really, really seeing that all of that content is part of the machinery of accumulated memory through experience. That all of that content of psychological consciousness is thought. So thought is the whole machinery of accumulating memory through experience, right? So we are accumulating memories upon memories through different experiences, all different kinds of knowledge we get, various types of good things happen and negative things happen, and there are stressors and there are pressures of life and influences of all different kinds. It is all accumulated within the mind. And then thought is that mechanism process through which all of this actually occurs. So to be able to recognize the content of psychological consciousness is developed. That ability to develop this recognition, this increases a bit further the more we connect with Bhagavan. The more connection there is, the more awareness there is that of the recognition, oh, this is an obstruction here, this is a problem here, my mind is getting stuck here. That is how it goes. And again, things like greed, anxiety, guilt, sorrow, hope, despair, all of this stuff is within the field of mental consciousness. The desire for psychological security, the desire for pleasure, all such things are radically transformed. They are radically transformed because one is able to see in silence, the great silence develops. One sees in silence the activity of the mind and all of the different interferences that can occur, that do occur. So, as we establish the connection with Bhagavan, even when we are resting, there is that abiding inside the Murti of Bhagavan. It's abiding inside the Murti of God. So that is a breakage out of the conditioning, and one gets into a state, mind is very, very, very pure and steady. So all of the chaos of the mind is gone. And that's what Maharaj is talking about here. He's saying that to recognize this Maya, this Maya that is from inside, we recognize it. And when you recognize it, it dissipates. We can say that is Guru Krupa. Guru Krupa is where there is a dissipation of all of this internal blockage. And that dissipation is the key. That internal blockage dissolves completely in Akhanda Vritti, and as one is moving forward towards Akhanda Vritti. It is a profound internal revolution. The whole system is profoundly changed. Because all of that content of consciousness is left aside. It's left alone. And when we leave it alone, our connection with Bhagavan, it increases further. As I explained this morning, through mantras, through bhajans, through kirtans, through other ways, all of this connection continues to expand and grow in so many different ways. So this is a very, very clear truth that is revealed in meditation. When we're sitting for dhyan, we can set aside some time to do this kind of dhyan. All of the truths about these interferences and how they are blocking the meditation and all, they become revealed. And then eventually we de-identify. You see it and it drops. You see it and it drops. And in dropping there is silence. Naturally. You see that that's not me, that content is not me, it drops. And that is how we are also able to be in a state of awareness to watch the entire movement of thought and emotion and memory. It's like a river that is flowing, and there's so much stuff flowing in that river, right? But we de-identify with that. And this is all pure observation. It's a very steady, very great observation. And that observation is possible from a bhakti point of view, bhakti tradition, is to sit with the Murti of Bhagavan. With that deep feeling. That's why we do the arti, puja, archana, we offer the various foods and everything. Why we do all that thing? That is to connect with Bhagavan. And to connect with Bhagavan in a way that we do not get entangled with any of the other forms. There's only one form that we get deeply attached to, that is the form of Paramatma. And that is what is talked about here in this very first Vachanamrut in terms of Akhanda Vritti. In terms of Akhanda Vritti, the second question here is about Maya. And of course, when Maharaj is using the word dhyan is that continuous effort to place. It's a continuous effort that is placed in connection with Bhagavan. And in Ashtanga Yoga, there are stages before dhyan. Like yam, niyam, asan, pranayam, pratyahar, dharana. And then comes dhyan. In Bhakti Yoga, you're starting directly with dhyan. All the others are kind of bypassed. They're already in Bhakti Yoga. If one is purified, is attached to Paramatma with a great deal of purity, with a great deal of harmony. So these are the questions. These are the two questions that we've looked at so far. There is so much more to be said about this, certainly in many different ways. But the fact of the matter is, this is a matter of practice. It's a matter of doing this. To sit in front of the Murti, in front of the chosen deity, and sit for dhyan. different mantras, different sadhana is done. And then with that, when one is performing daily activity, the fragrance of that dhyan continues. One is then living spirituality. And when you're sitting for dhyan, you are absorbing in spirituality, then you are living it. And in living it, one is expressing it in the relative world, in the relative way. The relative world is going to function in its way. But the bhakta is rising above that. While living in the relative world is rising above that. And in rising above it, one is rising above the conditioned thought patterns that one is generally stuck in. One is rising above the immense complexity and the entanglements within our internal system. And one is also rising above simply philosophical or scholarly speculation. That also is a type of maya. It's good to do, no doubt, but one rises above that because of bhakti. Bhakti is a dimension beyond speculation, beyond debates and philosophical reflection. It goes beyond that. Also, self-centered activity dissipates. The self-conditioning, self-centered activity, these things begin to dissipate very, very beautifully. And then, of course, naturally, economic, social, religious conflicts don't exist in this at all. They all dissipate. One is absorbed in love, and the divinity begins to reveal itself. Because the problem of Maya cannot be solved just by remaining in Maya. There has to be awareness of what is the content of consciousness, and then awareness of God. And to be aware is to see things as they are and let them settle. Let the content of mental consciousness settle down without condemnation or justification. And when we don't condemn and we don't justify, we're not giving it any energy in either direction. So that energy is available for bhakti, for bhajan, for dhyan. And then when dhyan gets established, naturally, there is a natural stillness, shanti, that is not induced. It is not something developed artificially. In the beginning, it may be induced, but then it's not afterwards. It's a stillness that is coming from the grace of God. So that the mind is no longer using thought, as it was doing in the earlier stages, to reach that stage of silence. It's very interesting. We use thought to begin with, thought and emotion and activity to connect with Bhagavan. But a point comes where a stillness, a non-induced stillness, naturally comes about. In Vachanamrut language, that would be called Purna Kam Bhav. Purna Kam Bhav means all desires are satisfied. There's no desire left to want something this or that. Usually people are always wanting something or another. But no desires are left to hanker after something because of the joy that comes from devotion. There's so much joy in that one reaches Purna Kam Bhav that in our current language we can call that non-induced stillness. So there's so much more that can be said about this. It is quite interesting, but we are trying to probe this carefully, practically, systematically, for the purpose of more awareness, for the purpose of more connection. And in that connection, there is a natural contemplation, and then one remains in that connection. The connection is the big thing. We may do some bhajan kirtan, some sadhana and all that, but the actual unbroken connection is the best. And that, even a glimpse of that, puts us into a state where we don't want to come out of it, because there's just joy there. It is experiential. It cannot be described really. All right, so we'll stop here for today, and then we'll continue next time with the third question that is asked in this particular Vachanamrut. And that third question is about what happens to the bhakta, to a devotee of God, after leaving this body? That is the next question. It's a very important question. It all intersects together. So we will tackle that and contemplate on that next time. Hari Om.